don't applaud now. Wait until after. Maybe I should explain my background. My training is in 19th century German history, the diplomacy of imperialism, and that is as far from baseball as possible. But my other great love beyond my family, I have grandchildren too, is baseball. And I discovered this topic while working on researching the 1891 Walla Walla team in its first professional minor league, the Pacific Interstate League. Teams from Walla Walla, Pendleton, LeGrand, and Baker City. And I came across this story and thought, well, that would be interesting to follow up. And I eventually followed up on it, and this is what comes from here. But I apologize in advance because I'm not trained as an American historian, so I don't have a background in American social and political history, which this reflects. So any mistakes are mine. Any mistakes I'll blame on I should have been paying attention when I was watching a baseball game or something. But this involves Fort Walla Walla, so it made a nice topic for the after hours program. And I hope that I can, okay, I'm off to what happened? Okay, I also don't have a teenage child anymore. They're all gone and grown up. So I'm on my own. When I was preparing this, and I should probably, you're going to see, it's kind of a corny thing, but I've designed this as though it were a 3-act Greek play. Because when I was working on this topic, the thought struck me, this sounds familiar. This sounds like the dramatist Aeschylus, the first of the 3 great Attic playwrights of 5th century Greece. This sounds like the Orestian cycle. And that cycle, and I said that right here, Aeschylus, the Oresteia is a set of 3 plays, a trilogy. Agamemnon, which tells the story of a murder. The Libation Bearers, that's when the protagonist Orestes murders his mother because she had murdered his father. This is the idea of blood vengeance. Under Greek tradition, he was supposed to avenge the murder of his father. Well, the problem was the murderer was his mother, and under Greek tradition, you don't commit matricide, you don't kill your mother. So what is he to do? And that's the dramatic story here, is what happens to Orestes in this trilogy of plays. And then finally, well, the revenge then is the plot of the second play, The Libation Bearers. And then in the Eumenides, a reference to the Greek Furies, these divine goddesses of vengeance. If you committed a serious crime, the Furies would chase you down, think sheriff's posse, but then they would capture you and probably torture you to death. Well, he is chased around Greece. He's caught in the third play, Eumenides, but Athena, the great goddess of wisdom and the patron goddess of Athens, intervenes, and she convenes a trial. And in that trial, with the people of Athens acting as jury, he is, well, it's a long legal aspect to it, but in the end, he is essentially acquitted. And the whole point of Aeschylus writing these 3 plays, it seems to be, is his idea that Athens has gone from a barbaric system of this blood vengeance, you revenge all crimes by killing the criminal, to this idea of justice in which a jury trial prevails. And Aeschylus, the idea here is that Aeschylus used this format to show how advanced and civilized Athens had become. Where it might have begun with bloodshed, it ends with a jury trial, and Apollo is there, the other god of wisdom, and they resolve this by way of a jury due process, something essentially constitutional. Well, that's what hit me here, and I apologize for all of the Greek reference here. Which button do I push? Okay. Then I did a little bit of look at vigilantism, because this starts out, Act 1 in a minute will be this idea of vigilantism. And most of my stuff came off the internet in terms of images, but thanks to James Payne and Groover, I got some nice pictures for the fort and town. But I found this on the internet. But the idea here of vigilantism, and vigilus is the Latin word for the police force, vigiles in Rome. But the idea is of vigilantism or frontier justice. That's when you don't think you've got adequate criminal systems, you don't think you've got the right kind of law enforcement, so you take the law into your own hands. And that goes back to the Greeks, and that's kind of the background here as well. I did a little bit of look at the Walla Walla Statesman, which, by the way, is available online through the Washington State Library from its founding in 1861 or 63 until 1884. You can log into the library. It has a variety of Walla Walla papers online and lots of state papers online, and you can plug in research term like baseball and find some amazing stuff. But I did find that there was an outbreak, if you will, of vigilantism in Walla Walla in 1865. So we're only talking 7 years after the foundation of the fort and the foundation of the town. This one article, and I'm sorry that it didn't reproduce well, absent children able to show me how to do it. But this one article in April of 1865 talks about vigilantes hanging for 1 month, 4 different people. And they're named in the article, a fellow named Mackenzie, cattle thief, 2 fellows, Isaac Reed and William Wills near Wallula, horse thieves, and then an African-American known only, well, the one phrase I can call him in public is Slim Jim. This is a period of fairly profound racism, and you can see that in the newspapers. He had been involved in breaking 2 other criminals out of jail. They got away, he got captured, and he got hung. So all this in just this 1 month. And you see the references here. The original one, the Walla Walla Statesman, and then William Dennison Lyman, former president at Whitman College, he wrote 2 very useful sources on Walla Walla history. And he tells at length this particular story about vigilantism. Okay, and then I jumped to 1891 to kind of lay the foundation here. By 1891, Walla Walla had become quite the boom town, quite a developed town. It already had competed for the state territorial capital, then state capital, but of course lost out to Olympia. Advanced town by the day. My one memory of U.S. history from 50 years ago was it William Jackson Turner? American historian in 1893 at the Chicago World's Fair gave a famous address about the end of the frontier. And he said the frontier ended in 1890 when the census showed population more urban than rural. And that, he said, was the end of the frontier. So Walla Walla in 1891 was essentially a very modern city. I use a quote from the Walla Walla City Directory of 1892. And these are available. This is available through Penrose Library at Whitman. It has a variety of sources online, including a series of city directories. These were the phone books of the age, and I'll show some shots from them hereafter. But they're quite useful in terms of research. They identify who is in town, who was paying taxes, who qualified to vote, what their addresses were, what they did. When you're looking to find out what the baseball players on the 1891 team are doing when they're not playing baseball, a great source, so I had to use it for baseball, of course. But talks about Walla Walla being a modern city, the Garden City, the city of homes, population from the 1890 census, 7,000 people, quite decent. I counted these up by hand. I thought that was an interesting number, 11 lawyers, 12 saloons, and 13 churches. Now, I think the number of saloons is a little bit low. Looking at some of the other references, and I'll show you that in a minute as well. 2 railroads, urban streetcars, gas and electric, telephone. Several times I would read in the newspaper about Sheriff Joshua McFarland calling Colonel Charles Compton on the post and having telephone conversations about various issues. So we're talking modern here. And oh yes, of course, the height of modernity, the baseball teams. Walla Walla had a Wahai high school baseball team. Whitman had a very active team. And then there were the town teams. These were teams that each town in the area, each town in the country would establish a town team, and they would play other nearby towns for civic pride, usually a bit of gambling money on the side as well. Walla Walla tended to dominate, being bigger than Waitsburg and Prescott and Dayton and Milton and Pendleton. Would play all of those other town teams. But the best team considered in the community was the A Troop team. Stay tuned. And then again, the town team, what will happen by July 1891 is that the 4 town teams, Walla Walla, Pendleton, LeGrand, and Baker City, decide town teams aren't enough, we want to be a professional minor league. And so they established this Pacific Interstate League, the first minor league professional team that Walla Walla hosted. The sources for most of this come from the 2 newspapers of the time, although the Union will shut down in May and be sold to a new owner who will reopen in June as the Union Journal. But it's the Walla Walla Union, and I love this, a fearless Republican paper. But look at the Walla Walla Statesman, strictly Democratic in everything. These ads come out of the city directories. The Whitman Library has 1889 and 1892, plus others before and after. So these are quite useful here. The Fort Walla Walla reopened again in 1873. In 1890, the 2nd U.S. Cavalry, I forget now where they get transferred to, but they're replaced by a squadron of troops from the 4th U.S. Cavalry, which has spent the previous 10 years in Texas and Arizona, mostly fighting the Apaches. And they were transferred up here, one squadron, several troops, several companies, were transferred up here basically to give them relief. The other half of the regiment was sent to the Presidio in San Francisco, and a couple of those troops end up taking over Yosemite Park and being a major factor in the development of Yosemite as a national park. Anyway, the headquarters are here, the band is here, and the Walla Walla newspapers talk regularly about public concerts by the 4th Cavalry Band. 5 troops, or there are only 4 troops are here during the course of this particular story, about 20 officers and 300 or so men who have only Walla Walla as a place to spend their pay. So Walla Walla businesses really like the fort, and that's going to play a role here. Charles Compton, who has been a member of the Army since the Civil War. He went in as an enlisted man, got commissioned as an officer, and is towards the end of his career. They arrived in June from June 1890 from Arizona, bringing with them, again, their own baseball teams. And look at, this is from Frank Gilbert's Historic Sketches of Walla Walla, published in 1882, but look at what the Post is buying from Walla Walla almost 20 years earlier already. 10,000 bushels of oats, 5,000 bushels of barley, 500 tons of hay, I can't quite read this, 500 barrels of flour, plus meat, wood, and other supplies. So the fort is of major economic value to the city of Walla Walla. Okay, and then a little footnote here, because the Northwest is peaceful, Compton would allow his troopers to leave the post between retreat, the end of the day's duty, usually around sunset, between retreat and tattoo. Tattoo was lights out in the barracks, usually around 11 o'clock. So from sunset to 11 o'clock, the troops had free access to town, and downtown was only about a mile away from the barracks. So they could walk in 15 minutes and run back after you've lynched somebody. Okay, murder most foul. I had to quote Shakespeare. My wife said I had to do that. Okay, the crime scene. This is a Sanborn fire map. Sanborn was a company out of Chicago that made up and published these fire maps identifying the material of buildings and the location of water supplies to suppress fires. And they are not only fun to look at, they make for great sources. So you note here, this is, look to the right here, Main Street. This is between 3rd and 4th. And if you look down all of the businesses on Main Street, you see SLA period. That's short for saloon. And you see saloon, 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 alcoholic sales, saloon, 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 booze. Anyway, that town is, that block between 3rd and 4th is the center of drinking on campus. What am I doing here? Sorry. In town. And in the middle of these is Charlie Rose's Saloon, pardon me. And on the evening of April 22nd, 1891, a private named Emmett Miller, and his first name is spelled various different ways, he has left the post after retreat and can stay until tattoo. He's gone into town. He's in Charlie Rose's Saloon. He drinks with fellow troopers. He goes back to a back room to watch some gambling, comes back out to the main part of the saloon, and out from the back room comes a professional gambler, quote unquote, as he's described in the newspapers, named A.J. Hunt. A.J. Hunt, age 65, Miller's 31. Hunt had been an Army trooper. In fact, he had, according to the Walla Walla Daily Union, he had first come to Walla Walla in 1873 with the 1st Cavalry, and then stayed when the 2nd Cavalry replaced the 1st Cavalry, and then left the Army. And Miller, who had been in the Army for 13 years since he was 18, he had spent some time in the 1st Cavalry as well. So they didn't know each other, but they both had this Army background, both had served in the same regiments, and for reasons that never were completely clear, even to the newspaper authors, they had an argument. Although the Union later refers, it's kind of small here, affections of a fair but morally frail damsel. I mean, is that a frontier story or what? They seem to have had some sort of background before this incident, although it was never made clear in the newspapers. But they had some sort of argument. Hunt pulls out a revolver and shoots Miller once in the chest. The city constable shows up fairly soon thereafter, arrests Hunt. A physician shows up fairly quickly thereafter, checks Miller out, calls the post, have them bring out a horse-drawn ambulance, and he's taken back to the post hospital, and a fuller examination by the post surgeon says probably a mortal wound. The bullet is lodged in the chest towards the spine. Too close to the spine for an operation, probably not necessary because it's going to be a fatal wound. Gambler A.J. Hunt, his reference in the city directory says resides Exchange Hotel, which I think was on either Poplar or Alder about First. Kind of hard to pin that one down. Lodged in the county courthouse. This is the county courthouse. Again, to the left, a Sanborn fire map, and to the right, a postcard. The basement is in the jail. If you look just to the right of the staircase in front on the north side of the county courthouse, there's a door that leads into the basement jail floor. The next floor, the second floor, is county offices. The third floor are courtrooms. Anyway, Hunt is lodged in the courthouse. The courthouse had been finished in 1881, 10 years earlier, and its inaugural event was to have a public hanging of a convicted murderer where this tree is on the right. They erected gallows there, canceled classes in the local schools that day so the kids could attend, and had the public the fellow had been a fellow husband and his wife had been tried for murder. They were traveling off to the Colville gold mines, and they murdered the couple they were traveling with, robbery and murder, or murder and robbery. And then the husband eventually confessed he did it, and the wife was therefore acquitted. Anyway, he was hanged in November of 1881 as kind of the formal opening of the courthouse. And currently, the sheriff is Joshua McFarland, who had been just elected sheriff in 1890, two-year term, and he will play a major role here in a couple of minutes. Okay, so that all was Wednesday evening. And then on Thursday afternoon, the Walla Walla Statesman, which published in the afternoon, the Daily Union published in the morning, the Statesman published in the afternoon. And they published this unsettling article about rumors of a lynching, that troopers are talking about breaking into the jail, grabbing Hunt and lynching him, murdering him, executing him for the mortal wounding of their comrade. So here we have the idea of vigilantism and frontier justice. Indignant and threats were made of coming to the city and mobbing Hunt. This is a picture of the Statesman building. I had to steal it off the internet because the one that I had disappeared again when I retired and left my office and left stuff behind. Okay, later that day, on the evening of the 23rd, Thursday evening 23rd, the post surgeon calls the sheriff and says, Miller is conscious, and if you want to talk to him, you better come quickly, because he might not be conscious for long. So Sheriff McFarland grabs a notary of the public and the constable who had arrested Hunt. They hire a hack, a cab, whose driver is a fellow named Ott McKenzie, who what's the phrase? The most dangerous place in Washington, D.C. is between so-and-so politician and a TV camera. Well, Ott McKenzie loved to have himself interviewed by a newspaper writer. And he's in every article. He's got something to say about all of this. So he drives them out to the Fort Hospital, the post hospital. This is where I need James Payne around to remind me all. This is a 24-bed, a nicely modern, well-designed 24-bed hospital. So they go out to the post, sunset, and they bring Hunt with them. They want Miller to identify him. So Miller, conscious long enough to say, yeah, he's the guy who shot me, and he more or less signs a document saying such. Well, in the meantime, Ott McKenzie is hanging around outside with his horse and buggy, and soldiers walk up and they say, hey, is Hunt inside? And of course, Ott says, oh yeah, he's there. And they say, well, you know what? We might not let the sheriff leave the post with him. So Ott runs right inside and tells the sheriff this. Well, thanks a lot. The troopers are outside, and they might just grab Hunt to lynch him. So the sheriff, McFarland, promptly relates this to Colonel Copton, who appoints James Went. What was his first name? Theodore Went. Theodore Went is officer of the day and the commander of C Troop. And Compton says, this is the guardhouse, Captain Went, I want you to take a squad and escort the sheriff and his prisoner off the post and back to the jail. Well, they leave the post, and the front gate, which was a little guard shack, and that was about it. That's now about where Giddy Up and Go coffee shop is, 13th and Main. They leave the post, and when they get off the post, they're confronted by, it's after dark, confronted by an unknown number of troopers. And the troopers demand that the sheriff release Hunt to them. Went says no, and you guys get back to the fort before I have you arrested. But then Went turns around and takes them all back, puts Hunt briefly in a cell because he can't get him any further than that. So Compton says, okay, you call out your entire troop, C Troop, armed, and escort Hunt back to jail. So at this point, with more troopers guarding Hunt, they get off the post and then get Hunt safely ensconced in the county jail. And Compton doesn't do anything. The fact that soldiers off the fort had initially blocked Wentz from taking Hunt back to Walla Walla, that doesn't seem to affect him. And Compton's kind of well, he'll get court-martialed. I'm sorry. There goes the rest of the story. Stay tuned, stay tuned, stay tuned. Okay, so they get, so then what Compton does do one thing, he does do one thing. He says, has the bugler call assembly. So all of the troopers who were on the post come out, form up in their troop formations, mustered by troops, unarmed. The guns are all locked up in barracks, supposedly. And then he's sitting on his horse, as described in the newspaper, and berates them. What do you think you're doing? This is violation of all Army codes. How could you betray me? It's raining, a light, warm spring rain, the statesman says. And for an hour, he holds them there, yelling at them, as Went takes Hunt and the sheriff back to Walla Walla. But that's all he does. That's all he does. Okay. And then comes Friday, April 24th. The Walla Walla Statesman has this, well, I don't know if it's famous or not, but by my idea, famous editorial condemning any sort of violence on the part of the troopers, and has this phrase, let the law take its course. And there's the idea that we're modern, we're advanced, we're civilized. We no longer practice vigilantism. We have due process. Let the law take its course. Okay. But it also publishes rumors about potential violence. And McFarland hires 6 more guards, and they said specifically armed with Winchester repeating rifles. And I presume that's an updated model of the Winchester 73. And there's your homework, is to go home tonight and track down the Jimmy Stewart movie, Winchester 73. A really great Western. No baseball, but a good movie. Okay. 4440, probably, yes. In the meantime, Blandford, this is what's his name? William Blandford, he's the prosecuting attorney for the county. And McFarland, they go out to the post to talk to Compton. This is about 7 o'clock in the evening. They've called ahead. They've made an appointment with Compton. They go out and talk to him, and they ask him, please do something about your soldiers. Can't you restrict them to post? They're threatening to lynch Hunt. And McFarland famously notes the weakness of the jail's construction. His phrase was, a man with a pickaxe could break through the cheap brick walls and break into the jail, and get Hunt. Compton says, there's nothing that I can do, which probably isn't true. And he says, you know what, these troops are loyal to me. They wouldn't do this to me. They wouldn't lynch Hunt. He's almost like a father, unable to see his unruly juvenile children or something. McFarland later says in The Statesman, we did not get much satisfaction from the colonel. Oh, well, McFarland. Okay. Now the act of revenge. Okay. This is from the morning, I quote here, Saturday afternoons, Walla Walla Statesman, exactly at 9:15 last night, A.J. Hunt, the gambler who shot and mortally wounded Private E. Miller of D Troop, 4th Cavalry, was taken from the county jail by about 100 soldiers from the garrison to the courthouse square and riddled with bullets. The paper also described the event as occurring with military precision. What had happened after sunset, and McFarland and Blandford, as they rode out to the fort at 7, noticed large number of troopers walking into town. Well, after dark, about 9 o'clock, troopers begin to form what was described as a skirmish line surrounding the entire courthouse. A couple of them walk into a general store right across the street from the courthouse, L's general store, and tell him to turn off his electric lights. The lights are showing outside onto Main Street and towards the courthouse. They want darkness. Ott McKenzie shows up, of course, and says to a trooper, what's going on? The trooper responds, wait a few minutes and you'll see. In any event, after this is all set up, as McFarland later says, 20 troopers start banging on the door of the jail saying, open up or we'll blow it up, we've got dynamite. And McFarland resolutely resisted for about 3 seconds. Opened the door and they bust in, and McFarland, well, you'll see. They grab the keys, they unlock Hunt's cell, they drag him out, and they shoot him to death. There's a fairly immediate autopsy by a local physician, by the coroner, who counts 16 gunshot wounds, any 10 of which would have been fatal. And then a smashed skull. Someone had probably taken a carbine butt to his head afterwards or at some point. There's a coroner, this is Yancey Blaylock, convenes an immediate inquest on the 3rd floor of the courthouse, feet from the scene, 100 feet from the scene or so, gets a jury together, grabs some civilians, makes a coroner's inquest. McFarland testifies, I made all proper resistance as sheriff of Walla Walla County, not likely. A local physician on the cause of death, I watch a lot of mysteries, my wife and I, so COD, cause of death, and baseball. Gunshot, 60 separate wounds, okay, 10th fatal. And the jury then concludes that Hunt had died, quote, at the hands, this is from the newspaper, at the hands of a mob supposed to be soldiers as they were dressed in army uniforms, but to us unknown. And other witnesses said that they saw lots of masked soldiers wearing bandanas, that classic Western idea, wearing your bandana around your face. And the thought is that as soon as they had killed Hunt, they all dashed back to the post. As soon as Compton hears about this, it takes him a while, he once again sounds assembly, the bugler sounds assembly. He musters the troops, but they all seem to be back. And, no one has the ability forensically to test for gunshot residue. So there's not an investigation particularly. One officer who would walk through D Troop's barracks did note that 19 carbines and 13 revolvers had momentarily been missing, but had now reappeared. So those were probably their murder weapons. And at the request, a bit late, of Prosecutor Blandford, Compton posted an order on the 25th, the next day, prohibiting the enlisted men without permission to go into town. But there's not a formal, Compton does not undertake a formal investigation until May the 5th. The Saturday newspapers, both the Union and the Statesman, printed a variety of articles, both covering the murder of Hunt, the lynching of Hunt, and the idea of a blame game. And I was running short of illustrations, so I tucked in, this is from the 1892 City Directory. And there he is, Charles Rose Saloon, known as Charlie, north side of Main Street between 3rd and 4th, that long block. And he resided probably above the saloon at 627 Main. Any event, you have the blame game. Sheriff McFarland, Prosecutor Blandford blamed Compton, the colonel. Compton blames Blandford and McFarland. The Statesman blames McFarland, and the Union blames everybody. The Union's about 2 weeks from shutting down and getting repurchased. So their coverage tends to kind of decline hereafter. And it's mostly the Statesman for the next month or so. This I thought was interesting, but so very typical of the Frontier West. Undertaker John Picard, at his business at First and Alder, displays Hunt's body. That's very typical of the Old West. Displays the body, took photographs, and published postcards. You could send them to your grandchildren. Postcards of the body. I hope not. I wouldn't do that, not to my grandkids. Hunt is buried at Mountain View on the 27th. There is a plaque that describes briefly the details. And momentarily, at that point, it was an unmarked grave, but since there's been a plaque put out about his demise, and gamblers paid for the funeral and followed the hearse out to Mountain View. Miller, ironically, died a few hours later, and he was buried in the cemetery, in the Folk Cemetery, right down here, the next day on the 28th. And that was with full military honors. His D Troop fired a salute. Every Walla Walla politician you could think of was out there for that burial. None went to Hunt's, but they all went to Miller's. A little bit of mea culpa there in terms of that. And then justice here, Act 3. This is Judge William Upton, who comes from a long line of attorneys, had been practicing in Walla Walla County for about 2 decades before all of this, had held several offices, including Walla Walla Rep and the territorial legislature. He'd been Superior Court judge off and on for years, private practice for years. A renowned jurist. Only flaw was he was extremely anti-Chinese and led the community campaign to rid Walla Walla of Chinese citizens. But beyond that, he was otherwise a really great jurist. Anyway, he impanels the grand jury, and then he will lead the Superior Court in the later trial. William Reeser, a name you wouldn't recognize at all in this town. And by the way, you look at 1891 newspapers, and every name you now recognize as a city. McFarland's, where are we? McFarland's successor as sheriff is a guy named Ghost, named after a road over here. In any event, William Reeser as foreman over the course of several weeks calls 71 witnesses, 54 troopers, well, that adds up right, 17 civilians, and on May 28th, the jury announces a true bill. They indict 7 enlisted men. And for reasons that I still can't figure out, when the trial happens, the court allows that one of the 7 gets a severance. He's going to be tried in his own separate trial, and so only 6 are put on trial in a minute. And here's what the jury decided. Did feloniously, purposely, and of other deliberate and predated malice kill and murder said Andrew Hunt? Formal statement of the jury. The next day, May 29, McFarland and 30 armed deputies, not the 6 he'd hired, but 30. And these are National Guardsmen. These are most of the, what's it, Company F here in town? The paper said they got National Guard rifles out of the armory, probably commanded by Thomas D.S. Hart, who was a lieutenant in the local company and the sports reporter for the Walla Walla Statesman. Did I say baseball? And he went out. Anyway, they went out and arrested the 6. I promised you baseball. So the day after they're arrested is Memorial Day, and that means baseball. And that means an exhibition game between the Malarials and the Rheumatics, 2 teams of renowned Walla Wallans, half of whom are either lawyers or judges or witnesses at the trial. The Rheumatics defeat the Malarials 16-9 with 700 cranks or fans. This is played at Ankeny Field, there in the middle of Whitman campus. They're arraigned, okay, it was Henry Blandford, there he is, arraigned on June the 2nd. Prosecution by the elected prosecutor, county prosecutor Henry Blandford, who was basically brand new. He's just now passed the bar, only recently become a certified lawyer. So he hires John L. Sharpstein, son of Benjamin, brother of Frank, as his deputy, pays him $300, not bad for 1891. The defense is State Senator George Thompson and longtime attorney and occasional judge Thomas Brantz. And the newspaper can't figure out how these troopers, 6 troopers, who make maybe $30 a month, could hire these 2 highfalutin attorneys, probably hired by town folk on part of the defendants. All plead not guilty. Public opinion, except, well, I guess the union is now out for a while. Okay, with the troopers. Baseball. The fellow in the middle in civvies there is John Sharpstein. This is the 1902 Sharpstein Sharpshooters, the town team. He had been manager of the town team in 1901 and 1902, so I had to get his picture in there. And that's my favorite baseball picture from the era. Okay, the trial begins on Wednesday. The prosecution calls 2 immediate witnesses. These are deputies from the jail, and they basically establish the facts of the break-in and the ensuing lynching. The coroner establishes the cause of death, and then Sheriff McFarland takes the stand, and he identifies the troopers. Now, there's a problem with this, because when he is cross-examined the next day, he admits, okay, I didn't identify them immediately. Oh, yes, and it is true that I only identified them after the city posted a $1,500 reward for the identification of the bad guys. And okay, yes, I did tell Charles Besserer, the fellow who had just purchased the Union. Charles Besserer was a German immigrant, a local character, owned several different newspapers and other businesses, and you also see him quoted on everything, usually in a badly done German accent or badly printed German accent. And he's quite the character, and I love that mustache. Okay, anyway, McFarland basically messes up the case for the prosecution. Okay, I didn't identify them until I went out to arrest them, and then I realized who they were. Basically, McFarland's testimony is completely wiped out. And it's Sharpstein, because Blandford is too new to the law. Sharpstein does all of the motions and a lot of the questioning. Then the defense, the afternoon of Thursday and all of Friday, the defense calls 30 different alibi witnesses who place each of the 6 defendants well away from the courthouse. Some were placed in the fort, some were placed at saloons in town, but none of them can be, they're all alibied as being away from the scene of the crime. A major witness is Trooper Bird from A Troop. He is the starting pitcher and a backup shortstop for the A Troop team. James Casey, a saloon owner. In about a week, he becomes the manager of the Walla Wallans, that team in the Pacific Interstate League, and is a major involved in baseball for the next decade. Okay, here's the bi-weekly eyeglass, which is available for sale. Do I get 10%? Available for sale in the bookstore. This is a bi-weekly newspaper published by a teenager, Charles Smith. His father is Captain Alan Smith, commander of A Troop. The guy's a teenager. He talks about he and his older brother going to Wahai. He publishes this short little paper every 2 weeks. And it's a wonderful source for anything fairly kosher that takes place on the Post. If ever you wanted to do a 4 or 5 year look at sports on the Post, this is your primary source. Anyway, he has this. I love the subtleness of this reference this is to baseball. A cloud no bigger than a baseball player's right hand has developed into a cyclone. Well, that's the lynching of Hunt and the trial. In any event, that's what I just had to throw that one more baseball reference in there. Okay. Closing statements on Saturday morning. And the Statesman has this in detail. Upton gives his directions to the jury. And his instructions start with this extraordinary explanation of due process with the American Constitution. It's a civics textbook. It's almost beautiful in its statement about American jurisprudence and due process and innocent until proven guilty, and the First and Fourth and Sixth and Eighth Amendments to the Constitution. And then he says you can find one of 4 different conclusions: guilty of murder in the first degree, murder in the second degree, manslaughter, or not guilty. And the Statesman says the jury adjourned to deliberate at 12:30, came back in 10 minutes. 10 minutes of jury deliberations with a not guilty verdict. And when the jury foreman announces the not guilty verdict, the courthouse gallery breaks into cheers, even to the point where Judge Upton, who had played right field, if I recall, right field in the Rheumatics versus Malarials game on Memorial Day, with Sharpstein playing shortstop for the other team, himself stands up and shakes the hands of the defendants who have just now been acquitted. Story's not over. We have to have an epilogue in our Greek play here. After a lengthy investigation, the Army decides, and I think rightly so, to court-martial George Compton. Investigation out of the department, the Northwest Department of the Army, headquartered at Fort Vancouver, sends a group of officers down to Walla Walla and investigate Compton and others. And he's court-martialed for neglect of duty to the prejudice of good order and military discipline. Well, duh, I'm sorry. He's convicted, suspended from active duty on half pay for 3 years, actually. But President Chester Arthur shortens that to 2 years, and he's returned to active duty after 16 months, split between Walla Walla and his home in Chicago. And then in the what used to be called the Spanish-American War, now I'm told is called the War of 1898, he was promoted to brigadier general, and he does not go, but the 4th Cavalry goes to the Philippines. He retires the next year for age. He's in his 60s at that point. The troopers, 6 troopers, enlisted men from D Troop for a similar charge, conduct to the prejudice of good order of the Army with discipline. They're escorted up to Fort Sherman, Coeur d'Alene, right there on the Spokane River, where it runs out of Coeur d'Alene towards Spokane, my old hometown. They're tried in August. 4 of them charges dropped against 4 of them for a lack of evidence, and then 2 are convicted. Clarence Arnold for taking guns out of the barracks, and Charles Trumpauer for taking a gun. And they're sentenced to 8 years, and 4 years at the federal penitentiary at Alcatraz. Got to be an Alcatraz reference here too. 4 baseball references and at least 1 Alcatraz reference. I'm thinking Clint Eastwood, right? Okay. The Army, interesting enough, the Army briefly considered disbanding the entire regiment because of the humiliation and embarrassment caused by the lynching. But then they go through several different cycles about what they can do, decide they can't do it for various reasons. And then I could not quite find the information, but it looks like some troopers considered exchanging troopers with regiments on, quote, less desirable stations. And it looks like several dozen troopers, and I can't quite confirm this, were transferred from here to the 7th Cavalry, which had just, what shall I say, had just committed the atrocity at Wounded Knee in South Dakota in the previous in December. And that was considered to be a less desirable station. Well, you're fighting the Sioux. Yes, it is. So they were switched. It looks like, I couldn't quite confirm that from the documents, but it looked like, and this is the 4th Cavalry in South Dakota at a later date, actually. The civilians, Judge Upton served as judge until 1997 when he resumed his private practice. Blandford left after 1 term as prosecuting attorney, joined Sharpstein in private practice, but then went back and won other elections. McFarland disappears. He finishes his term and literally disappears. He is not listed in the 1892 city directory. And he had already been proven to be pretty incompetent by his lack of actions and by his testimony. Brent's, the defense attorney, Upton is judge. Courthouse is torn down in the 19-teens. And I love this is so fun, I think. The notorious north side of Main Street between 3rd and 4th is now the farmer's market. I don't know. The fireman statue there is probably right there on the side of Charlie Rose's saloon. I don't know, but that seems to make. I think I had one more reference to the Eumenides. This is from line 1190. Our struggle here for justice has left us victorious forever. Athena, discussing the idea of civilization and due process. Okay, thank you. If you have any questions, particularly about baseball, I'm glad. Local baseball. Mariners lost today already. But anything else? Any questions?